we've all used various toolkits and stuff, and one of my favorite tools, and I talked about it in a previous episode of Select Star, was JDBC template. So imagine my excitement back when Spring Framework 6.1 came out, they released a new and improved tool, which I thought, how could you improve upon JDBC template? Well, they came out with something called JdbcClient. And JdbcClient is sort of to JDBC template what REST client was to REST template. Basically, JDBC template's a well-honed piece of software, highly developed, but it predates a lot of the advantages that Spring came with, that Spring has added on since then. Some of the advantages you get with like Java 8 streams, things like that, various improved APIs and things like that. So instead of trying to disturb a top-notch piece of software, they built a new fluent API through JdbcClient that under the hood is using JDBC template. And that is what we're going to play with today. But before you do that, I want to bring in my good buddy here, Felipe. So how you doing, Felipe?
Good. I love the undisclosed. I say on the
Undisclosed
location.
location.
Undisclosed location. That was very funny. But yeah, but tell the truth, man. You are on the beach. You are on Himalayas. Where you are? Come on, Rick.
I'm in the panhandle of Florida. I'm not on the beach because according to my watch, it's 39 degrees Fahrenheit. So if I was on the
Nice.
beach, we'd have to redub the show Select Snow or something like that. I don't know. It'd be an
Yes.
icicle on my nose. But um, I do want to let everybody know here, hey, I don't want you to miss an episode. We are coming out with these episodes every other week. Last week was a special edition. It's to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Cockroach Labs. Can you believe it? CockroachDB has been out for 10 years, and I don't want you to miss a show, but we had a special episode last week. Now, it's not that last week is the end of the celebration. When you're 10 years old, you're allowed to celebrate it throughout the year. So we're extending the love there, but I don't want you to miss future episodes of Select Star because we've been doing a gamut run we've been hitting all kinds of different Spring technologies. Spring's real cool and popular, but it's not the only game in town. We're going to be covering other stuff. And I remember when Felipe joined the team and I chatted with you, you were like, can we cover this? Can we cover that? Can we cover this? And it's like, well, for sure, bring it on. Let's do it. Looks like we already got some comments coming in here. Don, all right. Don's my good friend here. Good morning, Greg. Good morning to you, Don.
Good
And hey,
morning.
Don did not leave yet. Awesome. Uh, and hey, think about it when you start getting value. If you enjoy any video on YouTube, go ahead and hit the like button, especially this stream. But today we're going to talk about JdbcClient. Now, I remember going to the 2008 Spring Conference. Back then, I just remembered. Back then, they hosted them in Southern Florida, a place called Hollywood, Florida. Back then, it was called the Spring Experience at the time. There may have been some connectivity to the fact that Keith Donald, one of the founders of Spring Source, is from Florida. But they had a conference there, and that was when Arjen Putsma was making a presentation to a gigantic room packed with people about REST template. That was cutting edge because at the time, some of the other APIs to interact with remote web calls, to talk to RESTful web services were, I don't know, a little dodgy. So they had come out with the new REST template, and he presented that to the audience, and it was huge. It was awesome. And I actually happened to be at that conference. I came there to talk about Spring Python of all things, but anyway, through the years, the venerable REST template kind of reached a point where they had added to it, but they weren't going to take away from it. They weren't going to do too many upgrades would have, I don't know, gutted it to death. And there were a lot of critical systems that ran on it, and they realized that was not best for the community. So they came out with REST Client later on, and so it was sort of a souped up not rehabbed because it was a new API. It was fluent. And it also had things like reactive support baked in, things like that. So they came up with the new API, much preferred. The recommendation was you can keep using REST template. REST template is not going on anywhere. It's not end of life, any of that stuff. So instead, you can use the new API. It's recommended. It has better handles, if you will, fundamentally all around. And it's been really cool. So basically, JdbcClient is the same story for JDBC template. JDBC template isn't going anywhere. If you've ever worked with JDBC directly, then my heart goes out to you because that is like that's a scary experience. JDBC has a lot of power. What a lot of people don't know is everything, and I mean everything in Java land runs through JDBC, with the exception of reactive loads that go through RTDBC. So JDBC is a specification that's rock solid. It's not even part of the Jakarta profile. Instead, it is inside the JDK. It ain't going nowhere. But it was a spec that was built for both developers and driver developers. So you're talking about two different groups meeting at one API. So there's trade-offs in there. And so there's some warts to interacting with JDBC. A JDBC template makes it super easy to work with it and not deal with some of that stuff. Well, JdbcClient, we're going to see soon, and we've got to get to it soon, is fantastic, big improvement, and we'll see why it's like that. And so let's start building our app. I'm going to pull up.
And just remember for the guys while Greg is sharing, remember that we have, as well, you already know, like a JDBC template. We have the Spring Data JDBC that we already covered, and also we have the Spring Data JPA, right? But today we're going to do JdbcClient, kind of a high flexibility, a lot of very cool stuff that I didn't know that existed, because I was kind of checking out even all these Fluent API that you can have with this particular library, and I didn't know that you can actually do like a even complete level feature, right? Like a 1A sync, or even I can describe it. It's amazing just to practically handle everything. Using the power of your SQL statements, practically let this client with this Fluent API to do the rest. So yeah, I'm excited to see this session.
Ooh. All right. Sometimes it's a fun little game here where with streaming software, where you opens a window, then it closes, then it opens another window, then it closes it. All right, so let's check out what we got here so far. Okay, Mr. Maven, are you doing your magic here? All right, so it's sending me more pop-ups. Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? And I said no. Okay, so what we have here is, this is, if you caught our previous episode where we were talking about JDBC template, this has exactly the same dependencies. We have Spring Boot Starter JDBC. Now, this is not Spring Data JDBC. This is purely the Spring JDBC module, and that's where JDBC template lives, and that's also where JdbcClient also lives. Now we're going to build an API layer on top of it with basically a bare bones REST controller. So we need Spring Boot Starter Web. And we also need the Postgres driver, because CockroachDB speaks Postgres wire protocol. And then finally, without asking for it, you're always handed Spring Boot Starter Test module, which is just a fleet of test libraries. There's no need to say, I want to do testing. It's assumed that testing at some point is going to be on your list. And so we can see here, we got the Spring Boot modules, and then just here, just some pure Spring goodness right here. It's particularly this Spring JDBC module. Now what I'm going to do is I need to make sure I have my notes open to look at for reference. I once learned long ago in a presentation to keep your notes ready just in case. And what we're going to start with, again, is building our favorite, our employee object. Oops, let me see. Employee. So we're going to build an employee Pojo. We're going to build it up with a UUID. All right, I'm just making sure we got this up here properly. We're going to give them this employee, a name, and we're going to give them a role. Now I'm going to create a bare bones constructor to support doing any empty operations here if we need to. Now it's saying, hold on, who is that? And it's like, well, we need to create another constructor call. This one I'm going to make public, and I'm going to make it based on the attributes here. Now, one thing I installed recently was GitHub Copilot. So some of my ability to type fast is GitHub Copilot stepping in and rendering a little bit of aid. Now, one other thing is, so this is a constructor call. So now we have an empty one. This empty constructor call will just put nulls everywhere, okay? This is something you would use if you're going through a standard bean managing toolkit, because in standard Java bean stuff, it says you need to be able to create basically an empty object and then use setters to initialize everything, okay? Typically in your own code, this is sort of recommended against now. This is kind of an old, what's now, you can think of it as an anti-pattern, but there's a lot of legacy tools that run on top of this paradigm. So I'd recommend you either use the full constructor where you have, if you know what the primary key is, in this case, it's going to be this UUID thing, use that. Otherwise, you can create an alternative version where if you don't have the key yet, you just have the data values. All right. And so, this essentially sets us up where we can initialize anything. So you can either do this. I've made this protected to try to tell people don't use this directly, but it's still accessible to whatever tools may be out there. But my encouragement is, hey, consumer of my library, use this one instead. Now what I'm going to do is create some getters and setters. Like always, this is one thing where IDs can be quite handy. I'm going to define the equals and hash codes operator so we can define when objects are equal and when they're not. And then I'll let it res up a toString method for me. All right. So now one thing to notice in here, there's no annotations. That's because we're not leveraging any other framework to manage the objects for us. We're using the tools directly hands-on. And we're starting, this is from a domain-oriented perspective. We're defining this is our object, and the point of this object is to persist data in the database. Now, if we were talking about the object that has to do with interacting at the web layer, that would be more of a DTO object, and we would have different requirements for that. But that's not what we're doing right now, so we're not going to go down the rabbit trail of discussing DTOs. This is what I would call an entity object. And now that I've baked it, it's time to go build our employee repository. So I'm going to create another class and call it my employee repository. And what I'm going to do is give it a service annotation, because that way this will signal to Spring Boot, hey, when the app starts up, you need to res up one of these objects so it's operational and ready to go. And what I'm going to do is let's grab a JdbcClient object here, okay? The thing to understand with Spring Boot, this build file is the exact same build file from the previous session when we were working with JDBC template. Basically, if you use the same starter, it's over here. When you use Spring Boot starter JDBC, it will automatically create a JDBC template object and put it in the app context, and it will automatically create a JDBC client object and put it in the app context. So it's there to use as you wish. I'm going to let the IDE help me inject that through constructor injection. So it's going to create this constructor call for the repository. And you can say this is enough to get up to ground zero, if you will. So, I can start the app right here and it would res up this object and put it in here and then start up the service bean, but it doesn't really do anything. It's not able to do anything on our behalf. So what we need to do is define a few operations. I think some good stuff would be, let's define a save operation, and let's create a most basic finder, a find all operation. I'm just going to put in null here for the moment. So let's start from the find all operation first, okay? Um, actually, I'm going to back up, and first we need to do a little bit of setup here. So one of the other things that Spring Boot does for you is it will let you it'll run some stuff upon startup. One of the things it will look for are, in this context, it'll look for schema files. You can either have both a schema and a data file. So one is for defining the schema, and the other is for actually doing some insert operations. And so, in this situation, again, there's no framework helping us to write the code. So no one's going to go out and create our database schema for us. Now, in production, don't do this because the DBAs are creating and defining the schema in the database, not you. But for our demo app here, we're going to do a thing. We're going to drop table, employee create table. And you notice we're using a UUID for this one because this is what's recommended in general for a distributed database like CockroachDB. The UUIDs ensure that the keys, first of all, are generated locally. So if you're running on a node in San Francisco, you don't have to connect to a node in London to get access to some sequence counter. You don't have to make a long hop connection and come back to get that. And you don't have to deal with locks. Instead, UUIDs are what's called locally generatable. So we can create that. And then also, because they're basically randomized and hashed and guaranteed unique, it ensures that when you're storing it in the various ranges in CockroachDB, it will distribute them across the ranges. Now, I'm throwing out some CockroachDB specific terminology, and if you want to catch up, we've got a bit of a deep dive in last week's episode where instead of writing code, we actually dug into what are the fundamentals, like the fact that CockroachDB takes all your tables and divvies them up into chunks that we call ranges. And the ranges are sorted based on keys, in this case, based on the UUIDs. So 2 subsequent inserts into the employee table, we're going to generate totally different UUIDs that's probably going to end up putting them into 2 different ranges. And so that way you're ensuring that all your inserts and rows are being distributed evenly across the cluster. So by creating the schema.sql file, I know that Spring Boot, when it starts up, is going to run this SQL script for us. The other thing we need to do is we need to configure JDBC for us. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put in our data source connection files. Data source is a JDBC type or JDBC class. And so when you use spring.dataSource, what it does is this is telling boot, okay, when you make the data source bean, set the URL to this, set the username to this, set the password to this. And this is, I'm running a local one node copy, not very highly available. And it's setting these properties. And one thing is it's setting a JDBC Postgres connection. This is Cockroach's port number. And then this is the database that I actually have created. In this case, I have SSL disabled. This is only for demo. Do not run it in production with SSL disabled, or I will come and swat your hand. And it's the signal here that if you're going to check out and run this code on your own, you need to be sure to have done a create database payroll command inside CockroachDB itself, inside the shell. Okay, so if you download the code and run it and you started up CockroachDB, it's still not quite enough. It needs to enter through the database name. So you got to do that. I'm going to put some extra goodies in here. So we're going to configure, one of the things that Spring Boot does automatically is it reses up an instance of Hikari Connection Pool. Hikari Connection Pool is sort of an industry standard for connection pool management. So we have some pre-baked settings here to run. And I put in log, I call this dialing up the nerd knobs. So we're going to switch on and try to log as much stuff as possible. Now, there's nothing in here about login, Hibernate, or Spring Data, or any of that, because we're not using any of that stuff. And then there's one small wrinkle is the fact that when you run CockroachDB, it runs a administrative user interface called DB console, and that thing runs on port 8080, which is the default servlet port that Spring Boot uses. So we need to pick a different port. So in this case, I picked port 8000. Now we're one property away from having this thing set up. It's this one, SQL init mode always. Now this one's a little strange because what it does is it's telling Spring Boot when Spring Boot starts up, it has two modes of operation essentially. It either assumes you're using an embedded database for which it says, oh, okay, if you're embedded, you're probably either in a test case situation or a demo. And in that case, I'm going to run the SQL creation scripts. I'm going to scrape and load your database every time you start the app. Or it sees that and that's what it uses if it detects you're using something like H2 or HSQL, hypersonic database engine. And those two are embedded databases, and that's the common paradigm is that you need to scrape and load the database every time, okay? If you're using like Postgres or MySQL or whatever, it says, well, you're probably not in one of those situations. It's probably not a demo app. It's probably not a demo or a test situation. So maybe we should not automatically scrape your database, scrape and load your database. That might cause irreparable damage to production. So instead, we're going to shift to the assumption that that's a production grade app. So what we're telling it with this flag setting is, no, I want you to do that. I want you to do the init mode in this situation. And that's all that it does. So with those set up, let's see, we now can go here and go and start building our find all operation, okay? Let me grab a little sip of coffee. All right. So let's go and now let's finally get our hands on this stuff. Okay, so let's go to JdbcClient. And here we're going to first feed it the SQL we're going to do, okay? Probably seeing some of this. Well, gee, that thing, that's GitHub Copilot. You're seeing some of the pop-ups happening. That's some of the stuff that it does for you. So it's taking a guess at it. And I was going to type it by hand, but I'm still getting used to the keystrokes. So it said, here, I'll do it for you. But that is, in fact, what I want. Select star from employee. Now, in a second, I'm going to talk about why maybe you don't always want to do that. But I'm going to run a query. Now, when you talk about the JDBC, fundamentally, you're either doing a query or you're doing an update. That's kind of the two hooks when you go into JDBC is so querying is really for select and update is for everything else, whether you're doing an insert, an update, what have you. So we're doing a query, but we need to tell it how we want to handle the outputs. I'm trying to see if this is how this is. Yeah, it is showing up. So we can, when I share a window, it's able to show everything on the screen. Okay. So it's telling us that we can either feed it the type we want back, or we can feed it a row mapper of the type, or a row callback handler, or a result set extractor. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick the type. I'm going to pick our Pojo type, okay? Because what I want it to do is I want it to use the tools that it has in order to transform the results, okay, a row at a time. However, it's possible for us to take control of the situation. We can use, some of these classes have been around a long time. I can do a row callback handler, and what it does is it's going to hand me an entire result set, okay, on what I want to do with that. Or it's going to go row by row and invoke this callback. And you're seeing what, GitHub Copilot is throwing in front of me saying, hey, you want to do this? Which is rather impressive. So if you got special handling you need to do on each given row that's not just a straight copy of column to field, then this is the tactic to use. But there's other stuff as well. They had like result set extractor is another one, so you can do that. And that's a slightly different API as to how you work with that one. But these are both sort of parts that have existed forevs, if I say it, put it like that. But I'm not going to use that. Instead, I'm just going to have it transform the column property by property. And then I have this option here where I'm going to do the pop-up. Are we seeing that? No, wait a minute. Trying to see how much it's... Okay. So this is funny because see the GitHub Copilot the GitHub Copilot shows in gray text opportunities, whereas if I ask the IDE to give me a pop-up, that doesn't render in the streaming software. But essentially, we have different options here on how we want the results yielded. We can either say, I'm querying for that, but I want give me back a single entry. And that means, okay, the what I'm doing declaratively is I'm saying, okay, here's the SQL statement I want to execute. What I'm wanting to do, this is a query operation, run it through JDBC's query, and I want this applied to each row that comes back. But what do I want to do in the aggregate? Am I looking for a single row of data? In that case, I give single. And if I get handed back some kind of collection, it's probably going to generate an exception. But I could also say, give me back a list. Do I want a list? So in that case, it'll take all the rows and use it to yield a list. I can also say stream. Give me back a Java 8 stream that I'm going to then run it. I'm going to run this method through another processor, and what it's doing, it's going to connect it together. Now I have to look under the hood at the code. I don't believe that it's going to fully realize the entire result set before it wraps it in a stream, but I don't know that for sure. You have to go check the code on that. And they even have you can do a set operation. So it's going to apply the set specific. So it's going to use that equals and hash code stuff. However we define what it's going to use to define what makes a unique set of values. And you can even say, I want to get back an optional. Do you want to use the optional APIs in order to contend with whether or not there's something there, or would you prefer to be handed a null if it's empty? So what I'm going to do is, because we're trying to return a list, is I'm going to put in the list operation. And then what I'm going to do is this is what I'm going to return. And there we go. We've written this. Now, there's something I like to do that maybe not everybody does this, but ever since Java 8 streams came out and we have these kind of fluent APIs where you're like, okay, do this, declare this, then set this, now carry out this action. I like to chain them so it reads from top to bottom. And sometimes IDEs don't want to work with that. And so sometimes, if I was to trim out all this stuff, sometimes it's not like, this is what your IDE will do to you. And to me, this is a lot harder to read. So I always like to put in a certain number of comments at the end of a line that stops the IDE from doing that. And I think I have to do this by hand. Let's see here. Yeah. And I really love Java's multi-line string. Oh, one too many. So if I just put in the right breaks, it does this kind of nicely for me. So, and then this lets me also write my select statements where I can read them top to bottom. So I spend a little bit amount of effort. We call this code polishing, and I like to polish code. So with this written, I've now got an operation. However, I can't launch the app yet because first of all, I need to initialize. But before I initialize, I need a save operation. I can't save anything if I don't have my save operation. So let's work at building that. So first of all, I want to be able to distinguish, so if you're coming to the table and you got a Pojo object, are you trying to do an insert or an update? And you have to decide how you want to do that. And I'm going to take the paradigm that if I don't have the UUID, if I don't have the primary key in hand, it's probably an insert and it needs to create a new one. But if I do have the UUID, I'm going to assume it's an update. And so I can easily check if the ID field is null or not. So I'm going to go right in here and check if employee.getID is equal to null. So we'll do that. Now, one of the things I want to do here is I don't if I'm going to be inserting it and I don't have an ID, well, I by golly need to have an ID. If I should have turned off GitHub Copilot today, but so employee.get role. Okay. So what I'm doing is I'm going to make a new instance of this thing, and I'm going to copy in its name and role. That way, I'm not altering what somebody passed into me. I'm not messing with that. So I'm creating a new object here, but I need to set its ID value, and so I'm going to use the UUID operator and or utility class to then set a new random ID, UUID. Let me say that correctly. And then I'm going to do my update operation. Sorry, insert. It is wanting to really help me out a lot here. Insert into, employee. And let's see, ID, name, and role. Values, ID, name, and role. I think that's it. Again, let me put in my little comments to nicely format it. Oops, stop. Okay. Oh yeah, I need to feed it the parameter. In this case, I'm going to pass in the object I made. It's a pseudo deep copy, but with a locally generated UUID. And then I'm going to issue an update. And so let's push it up here on the page a little better. So in this situation, I'm going to sort of copy the values that we care about, the incoming values. I'm going to now configure an ID. So this should have generated a brand new UUID without going anywhere else, without having to hop to another machine in the cluster. And now here's where the gold is with JdbcClient. Oops. So I'm going to feed it the SQL statement, and these are the 3 columns I'm going to load up. Now here's the 3 values. Well, let me go ahead and say this before I double back. Here's the parameter that I'm feeding it. In this case, I'm just feeding it a POJO, an employee object, and summoning it to do an update. And so this is one of the cool features that I like with JdbcClient is something that was added back around Java 5 when Java 5 came out back in the Stone Ages, was support for name parameters. When JDBC started, they used positional parameters with just a question mark. And then your arguments had to be in the same position. But then they added named parameters. So you could have colon ID, colon name, whatever. Use the colon notation to give a name to it. Well, what they added with JDBC template, not JdbcClient, with JDBC template in Spring, there's a thing called a SQL parameter source, or SQL. It's an object. You feed it an object and tell it which parameter to associate it with. Okay, and it uses a version of JDBC template called named parameter JDBC template. Now I know there's websites out there where they make mockery of some of Java classes by having abstract singleton proxy factory being that kind of stuff. But it actually makes sense. It's a named parameter JDBC template implementation. So you can feed it that. What JdbcClient is doing, we saw if you go back and look at SelectStar where we were talking about the using JDBC template, we used a bean property-based SQL parameter source. That may not be the exact name, but that's basically it. It's a SQL parameter source, and it uses the bean property convention where it's going to look at all the properties, ID, name, and role, and extract that and use that as a means to extract arguments out. What JdbcClient is doing for us, it's essentially simplifying. We feed it an object like that. Inside the code, it takes a quick peek at the object and says, is this a map or not? If it's a map, it has a mapping. You can issue a mapping of this parameter to this value, this parameter to this value, this parameter to this value. If it's not a map, it assumes that it's one of these domain objects. It's a POJO object, and it applies that property stuff. So it's able to seamlessly convert that employee to save object. Let's put it back up here. The employee to save object. Let me make it a little bit bigger by putting Felipe in the corner. And it's going to take this employee object and extract out the ID, name, and role and register them in an implicit map that it's going to be able to access in this operation. So that makes it super simple and I can very easily look at this and tell what it's supposed to do. Now I need to do the update. In the update, there's no need to generate a UUID, so I don't need to make an entire object. Now, isn't that charming here? The GitHub Copilot is saying, "Is this what you want?" And it's like, well, gee, okay, that's scary. So here we're going to do an update command, and here's the part: if you're going to embrace AI tools, please do take the time to go read what it generated. So we're doing an update on the employee table. We're going to set the name equal to the name parameter, and we're going to set the role equal to the role parameter, and we're going to qualify it by using a where clause on the ID field. Now, CockroachDB has protection. Like if you have been burned in the past because you rolled an update query to production and forgot to put a where clause on it, such that it updated every row in the table, then smash the like button. That's something that's easy to accidentally, that's a whoops where you're like, oh, I forgot to put the update on it. So CockroachDB, if you try to do that kind of update without a where clause, that's an error. It actually generates an error. It says, you forgot an update clause, because that probably is a mistake. The chances you're going to issue updates against everything without a where clause is slim to none. So in this case, we're feeding it SQL. It's sort of the same thing. We're defining, here's the everything we're going to do is based on SQL, whether we're updating or changing or selecting the data, or whether we're updating, selecting, or changing the data structure. Was it DML, data modification language, versus DDL, or data definition language? It's data manipulation language versus data definition language. Either way, it's SQL, okay? Then we have our parameters, and then it's what do you want to do with it? In this case, we're doing an update. And in most situations, this is a void method. So we're not in either situation. We're doing the same thing. We're not looking for results, at least in the way we've built it here. So this suggests we may have enough here to get going with loading some data. We've built our save operation here, and we've built our find all operation down here. So why don't we res up some data? So I'm going to make another class called a database loader, and I'm going to call it a configuration class because I'm going to include some bean definitions in here. So this is going to go create with a Java 8 Lambda expression a bean. Oh, this thing is super eager. It's jumping ahead before I can say it. It's going to create a command line runner, which is a Spring Boot class, which essentially says when the app is up and operational, run every command line runner that's been registered with the app context. All right, cool. Let's do that. So let's see, who's on our team? We're going to have Frodo Baggins. No, Frodo Baggins is not a thief. He's a ring bearer. Nice try, AI tool. I didn't realize that in doing live streaming, I'd be able to, bang on AI tools. Okay, and you can't have Frodo if you don't have a Samwise Gamgee. He's a gardener for now. It'll be later when he gets his promotion, becomes an actual ring bearer. Okay. And with this should be enough. So let's run it and find out if it's enough or if I made any major flubs. Okay. I don't see any stack traces being thrown in my face. So it looks good so far. Now we can see, let's look at the console output for this thing and see what we've got. So far, Tomcat initialized with port 8000. Cool. We can see things like Hikari connection pool was created. Now here we can see it's executing the scripts that we asked for, the schema.sql scripts, drop table, create table, done. And in fact, only took 228 milliseconds. So now the app is started, which means it's time to run our command line runners. And so here it is here's the first one, executing prepared SQL update, insert into employee, and here it's got Frodo Baggins Ring Bearer with a generated UUID. Now, if you'll notice over here, look at this. It says JDBC template is doing that. Well, I don't remember using JDBC template. It's right here. It's JdbcClient doing it. So what's the story? Well, it turns out JdbcClient may have the API that we're interacting with, but under the hood, it's just using JDBC template. And it's either using the plain JDBC template or it's using name parameter JDBC template, which sort of is just an extension of JDBC template. So it's doing it. It's just using the same good stuff that we've been using in our previous episode of Select Star. We can look a little further at what's on the logs here. Let me. It's also done this insert, which is it's loaded Bilbo Baggins Burglar, and it's loaded this one, Samwise Gamgee Gardner. So this is the order that we put them in the initialization logic. And you'll notice these UUIDs, even though we put them in order 1, 2, 3, if you look at these UUIDs, this is AEED, this is CCE5, blah, 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 and this is 928. This is not the order that they'll actually be put into the ranges. It's randomized the order. Now, this is all that we have, and right now, this is sort of all that we can do because we haven't built any form of web layer on top of it to interact with it yet. And that is what we can do next. So I'm going to just bump the console out of my way here, and I'm going to let's build a controller class. So let's build an employee. Let's grab a repository once again. Let's initialize it, and let's build some routes. Okay. What I want to do is let's do a couple of them here. Where say let's do some mappings. Let's go to API employees. Where we're going to find all. And here, let's just put a placeholder, return null, and then let's also fetch employees, but let's add a twist and look for employees with a certain role. Let's assume, if you're needing to find somebody to do a certain task, you probably have an idea in mind what they need to do. We'll call it find by role. And I'm going to make one argument here. And let's map it with a path variable. I believe that is the right annotation. So this will define two of our operations. So I should be able to just go into and tap that repository and use its find all method. And for this one, what do? We don't have a method for doing that. We'll paste it in here. Find by role. We'll pass it in as a. This has now become a hard requirement. Okay. So I'm going to say yes. Okay, go create that method. Based on what we've done so far, should be able to get to this, not too hard. Okay. So I'm going to do select star, don't help me GitHub, from employee where role equals role. Now, there should be one parameter. In this case, it's not a POJO object. I'm being handed a simple scalar value role. So I'm just going to spell it out. This is a param, and we're doing a query, but for what type? Let's put in the type here. And we need to tell it we're looking for a single value. Scratch that. We're not looking for a single value. We are looking for a list. Let's put some comments here. Nice code polishing comments, and let's close that thing. Now that's neat. What I kind of enjoyed about that process was I was able to just talk my way through it in plain English. So I was like, okay, let's see. This is the select I have in mind. Now I need to feed it the parameters, and I need to query. But at the query point, when I define the queries, when I need to define how I'm going to translate it back to what we're using. So I fed it the type. And then, my mind had gone down a different rabbit hole, and I started saying single. And then my eyes looked up to the method signature and said, oh, we're returning a list. We're not returning a single, we're returning a list. So let me change it. And I don't have to go back to the previous steps and noodle out, well, wait a minute, that's not right. And instead, it's sort of straightforward. And this is kind of the whole point of a Fluent API is if something's not lining up at some point, it should be clear and declarative. So Fluent APIs are really powerful, and it's not because they use the this operator where you set a parameter and return this, set parameter, return this. It's because they're thought to serve us in a more logical, concise fashion. So this should be operational, and I should be able to restart the app and then use it. Okay, it looks like it started effortlessly without error. So what I'm going to do is flip over to a terminal session here, and let's see what we got. So remember, we're going to port 8000. Let's look at that first route. I always pipe mine results through JQ, so it gives me a nice look and feel. And right here, I've got a JSON list being fed to me. And we can see here, I got Bilbo Baggins, Samwise Gamgee, and Frodo Baggins, which is definitely not the order that we inserted them in, but it happens to be the order that CockroachDB is giving them back to us. It happens to be that this all fits within a single range. And what you get, if you don't put an order by default, it's going to give them to you in the order that they came out of the table so that it doesn't expend any additional effort. And in the table, by primary key, they're going to be by default sorted by the primary index, if you will, which is the ordering of the UIDs. Now, we did add, let's pull up that controller here. We did create one other method, API employees role. So what if I do that? I have to feed it. That's a parameter. So I should be able to type Gardner, and I'm going to get back a list. This is a JSON list. It's a list of one, Samwise Gamgee. I should be able to do ring bearer, only I can't put a space in here. Instead, I have to encode that, which happens to be %20. So if I look for that, I'm going to get Frodo Baggins. And if I look for burglar, I should get Bilbo Baggins. So right away, we've been able to use something and get something operational here. And in a sense, I'm able to think more in a kind of a mixture between the domain, I'm thinking about the domain level, employee objects, and I'm thinking of the SQL operations I want to do, and I'm not getting dragged into the mud of some of the funky behavior of JDBC. So, it's a common thing in talking in a relational database through code that you have to open a connection, open a cursor, submit a query, you get back a result set, iterate over the result set, map every row from the response to an object, assemble your POJO, and then close the cursor, close the connection, and hand the final results back to the person that was making the call. And that's a lot to track, a lot to keep up with. And at that point, you're not thinking either business logic, and you're really not thinking SQL relational database. You're thinking API calls and how to satisfy the contract. And with this kind of code, I really enjoy that I can pull my thoughts back up to that level of, okay, what's the right SQL operation for this? Because SQL's not complex. A colleague of mine from a previous job once said SQL's not rocket science, and he's right. It's not. It's to me, it's kind of clear cut. And to me, I view it as sort of like the first DSL ever because it's been with us for over 40 years. So it's like a DSL for talking to data. So I like being able to let me think in SQL because that's a data oriented declarative language, and then let me think in the basics of how to do domain based stuff. So let me think about employees or orders or customers or whatever the domain language is. Let's speak in that language because now we're speaking in the language which if I'm going to talk to a fellow developer that's on the other side of an API interface, that's the language I want to speak about, not JDBC method calls. Oh, Deshaun is here. Well, I hope you have not missed too much of the good stuff. Good to see you here, Deshaun. So tell me, Felipe, what's your take on all this fun stuff here with using JDBC clients?
It's more. I think it's more clear with this Fluent API. I mean, you have this kind of a probably on JPA or data JDBC because it's based on kind of ORMs. Maybe it has more complexity, but here you have this flexibility that you can have, or the actual Fluent API can give you. So for me, this is easy, right? So guys, I've been talking with a lot of customers, and they say, well, I'm not a big fan of JPA because sometimes there are cycling classes and all that kind of stuff, and at some point maybe we are going into the low level, right? Like just pure JDBC or maybe JDBC template. But now with this, practically you have another option that is easy. It's a low level. You have more flexibility, and this is the new level, I can say, for connecting to your databases. And again, you already saw that, right? Practically, JDBC client is using behind the scenes JDBC template. So practically, you're already covered on that. So that's very cool.
I've heard in different circles like criticisms of, well, if JDBC template's so good, why do you need to replace it with something else? And it's like, to me, it's a testimony of if JDBC template is so good, it's natural that you use it in a higher level API. I think that to me is the evidence that JDBC template is like the right level API for doing stuff. The fact that, okay, now it's not hard to put a Fluent API on top of it and leverage it. We see popular toolkits all the time, and people, I've got to have this. Like whether you're talking about front end toolkits in JavaScript, or there's apps that everywhere will use underscore. There's like this utility library in JavaScript called underscore. The more up to date one, I think, is called Lodash because low underscore Lodash. The evidence is if those are of great utility, great value, people will pick up and use them in higher level libraries. And so that's my take on seeing JDBC template being used by JDBC client. It works. And that was some of the criticism I saw in the early days of Spring Boot. It's like, well, the only reason Spring Boot's good is because Spring Framework had all of these problems with it. It's like, no, Spring Framework was a collection of ingredients to bake a cake. And Spring Boot is, as Phil Webb said, is a pre-assembled cake where you have the option to tweak and tune and adjust how it goes together. And it's like you always have the option to swap out the ingredients as needed, to drop down where you need it. And I think that the evidence is in that's popular because it gives people the control that they desire. And I see the same thing using JDBC client.
Yeah, and I think for the Spring framework guys, I don't know. Probably you're already familiar with the naming convention that the Spring framework team has. Like, first of all, we have the template, right? So everything that ends on template, you are going to be sure that you have this particular design pattern that is going to remove all the boilerplate that you normally need to do, like a lot of steps simplified with only one particular class. We have not only the JDBC template, we have, if we are doing messages, of course, we
Yep.
have with Rabbit, we have Rabbit template, we have JMS template. So we have, or practically the Spring framework has a lot of these particular classes that allows you to make easier things and enterprise grade level, right? So it's very cool that we can avoid all those kind of things that normally is going to take us, I don't know, a few hours versus minutes now to complete. And now with the AI tool, it's even easier, I think.
Yeah, I was like, okay, GitHub, I'm trying to say this and say it with pizzazz, and you're like, you're giving the punchline to the joke before I can say it. So that's a fun game. So all right. Hey, by the way, do you want to play with this yourself? Do you want to get your hands on a little CockroachDB? Again, I like illustrating. This is not the only. We're not going to just go in here and talk about Spring tools. Okay, we'd run out of content fast. Okay. Well, maybe that's not true, because some of our buddies like Deshaun and Dan Vega and whatnot keep generating Spring content on YouTube to no end. But nevertheless, Felipe and I are going to cover all kinds of stuff on here to show both how you can use your tools without thinking on top of CockroachDB, or you can take full advantage of that. So if you want to get your hands on a little CockroachDB and see some of its cool features, go check out university.cockroachlabs.com. There's a QR code on here. You can just scan that, or go to university.cockroachlabs.com. It's free. It's actually a lot of fun, and you get some hands-on both working with the database and using code on the database. Like I said, be sure to subscribe to the channel. That way you can catch it the next time an episode of Select Star hits the waves. And I like your vote for that, Deshaun. Yes. So, all right. Thanks, y'all, and we will see you next time.
This episode is over, but your learning has just begun. Visit CockroachLabs.com to find all kinds of content to expand your knowledge.